Professor Rahula. Thank you. And yes, let me introduce our resource person today. It's a privilege and honor to introduce today's resource person for this research skills session, Professor Nimal Rajapakse. Professor Rajapakse joined SLIIT in 2019 after serving at 4 Canadian research universities for more than 3 decades. He is currently the Senior Deputy Vice-Chancellor and Provost at SLIIT. He is also an Emeritus Professor at Simon Fraser University, Canada, and Honorary Professor at IIT Guwahati, India. Over the years, he has held several senior leadership positions at Carleton University, Simon Fraser University, the University of Manitoba, and the University of British Columbia. Professor Rajapakse has been ranked among the top 100,000 researchers worldwide across all disciplines by Elsevier Stanford ranking. And according to this ranking, he is currently the highest ranked researcher employed by Sri Lankan universities and higher education institutes. So we are truly looking forward to an engaging and enriching session with you and to the valuable knowledge you will be sharing with us today. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Pushpamala. I'm sharing the screen. Can people see my screen?
Yes, sir, we can see the screen. Yeah, it's now.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so thank you everyone for giving me this opportunity. Am I audible enough?
Yes,
Yes, sir.
yes.
So giving me this opportunity to talk about this topic, I must actually mention that I don't consider myself as an expert, but I will actually share some of my experience, particularly what I gained during my close to 40 years in Canada as a researcher, and share that experience with you so we all can actually benefit from that. What happened to my screen now? Something went. Can I stop sharing and go back again? So you can see now, right?
Yep. Yes.
Okay. So as the Professor Rahula mentioned, and also our librarian Pushpamala mentioned, this is an important topic and something I think we all have to learn. And so I'm going to talk about, I also added this word integrity into what Pushpamala mentioned in terms of the topic. So I slightly changed it to beyond results, the integrity and ethics of research. And what is happening to the screen? Something is going wrong here. Okay, it's coming now. So let me give you the outline of my talk. I will briefly touch about, give you an introduction, and then talk about the responsible conduct of research and also ethics of research, and then I will make some conclusions. So introduction. Now the first thing is we should actually at least remember ourselves what is research. So to do that, I looked at the Oxford Dictionary, and so here is actually what is I could find in terms of the definition of research, and there are many different versions of this. So it's systematic investigation into and study of materials and sources to establish facts and reach new conclusions. Now, by the nature of this activity, it is also open to various malpractices and abuses. And these are due to competing interests and various other factors. And if you actually look at internet and media and so on, you will find massive issues related to research. And these have led to what we call as bad research. And they have serious implications for individuals as well as the society in general. And I will tell you some examples, a few examples. There was a study that was conducted and reported in one of the most prestigious journals in medicine, where the authors claimed that the MMR vaccine caused autism. And that led to many people actually not vaccinating their children. This is a very critical vaccine, MMR. And because of this study, and then later it was proven that it was not very scientific. There were a lot of questions about the methods employed and so on, and which eventually led to the full retraction of the paper and serious professional misconduct investigation by various authorities. And then there was this claim of room temperature fusion around 1989, and that was later discredited. And these were very well-established researchers who claimed this. And then also in 2004, a paper related to stem cell research by very prominent researchers. And again, later actually discovered that a lot of it was based on fabricated data and so on. And that also raised questions about the institutional oversight as well as related to co-authorship. Now, closer to all of us, unfortunately, very recently, a well-known researcher who is from Sri Lankan origin in the United States was found to have plagiarized the doctoral thesis, and several of research papers in excellent journals were retracted in 2024. So you can find actually thousands of such cases if you look into internet and various other sources of information. And this has actually increased over the past 6 decades, and there are various reasons for that. And many of these things are peer competitions at the institutional levels, and often another factor is the conflict of interest, funding issues, and so on has led people to make many shortcuts and make various claims, and then in the process actually sacrifice their credibility and also the credibility of the institutions they serve. However, over the years, the universities, funding agencies, and governments have actually recognized these challenges and cases of serious misconduct, and they have brought in various guidelines and processes to protect research integrity, which I think is a very good thing. Now, we should look at actually when I say integrity versus ethics. Now, these two are related, and they possess also distinct characteristics and implications. If you look around and look at literature, you will see that ethics are principles that guide behavior, while integrity suggests that we should carry out ethical principles in our daily lives and activities rather than espousing an ideal and doing something contradictory. Now, this I obtained from a UN-based organization. It is available on the internet, right? And I think that is a very good, simple explanation of how the difference between ethics and integrity. I will talk about a very critical thing later when you read this definition. So ethics are often defined in terms of rules and regulations. Now, if you look at many universities have code of conduct for staff and students. So that is actually a code of ethics, right? Certain things that the staff should do, expect the standards, and similarly for students also. Then many of us who belongs to various professions, now I am a professional engineer, and in medicine, in law, and various fields, actually, there are code of ethics for professions. So if you are a professional in a certain field, then that institution, that guide, that controls the profession, that will actually come up with this code of ethics. And then on top of that, we also find, particularly with respect to research, there are funding agency guidelines, manuals, and then also the rule of law. Whatever the laws of your country, that also actually applies to research that anyone conducts. So you have to make sure that you are also working within the legal framework when you want to conduct research. On the other hand, integrity is the personal commitment to uphold ethics. So this is where things get very complicated, because ethics, actually you can write, develop guidelines, processes, and so on. And you can see that actually, right, in many organizations and so on. But integrity is something, is a personal thing. A personal thing to uphold the ethics. So it can be very subjective. It is open to many gray areas. And it is open to also a lot of internal as well as external influences. So this is where we find actually, as I said, ethics can be defined, processes can be established, and you can put everything into a fairly well-defined box. Whereas integrity is very much dependent on the individual. And that is where you find that we have had many cases of research misconduct or questionable integrity in conducting research. Both are essential, right? Because one gives you guidelines, educate you, and tell you how to follow and do things, right? So they are all essential to promote and sustain credible research. So now I'll talk about responsible conduct of research, or in simple terms, research integrity. I'm taking this from something that I followed for almost 37 years in Canada. Anyone who is getting funding from the Canadian government agency has to follow this framework. So this is the Canadian approach, the Tri-Council guidelines for research integrity. So there is an introduction, you can see that. It is basically the definition of research to some extent. And then it talks about a very important thing, that is the duty of the researchers, duties of honest and thoughtful inquiry, rigorous analysis, commitment to the dissemination of research results, and adherence to the use of professional standards. Now, these are things that everyone is expected to follow who is receiving funding from the Canadian Research Councils. The Tri-Council means in Canada there are 3 research granting funding agencies: the Medical or the Canadian Institute for Health Research, and then the Natural Science and Engineering Research Council of Canada, and the Social Science and Humanities Research Council of Canada. So promoting research integrity, what do we have to do? At a minimum, researchers are responsible for the following: rigor. We have to be very rigorous in all our scholarly activities. right? In proposing and performing research, in recording, analyzing, and interpreting data, and in reporting and publishing data and findings. I have mentioned this also in the staff development sessions, right? How rigorous you have to be if you want to be a credible researcher. The next one is also in terms of record keeping, because over the years, actually this has, I would say, probably about 30, 40 years, not much attention has been paid to this. But due to integrity issues, a lot of focus on record keeping. In other words, keeping complete and accurate records of data. Right? So others can actually replicate your work if necessary. Right? And so this one is very important, and there are efforts around the world actually in terms of data protection policies and so on being developed, and data repositories are created so that we can support research integrity. Then accurate referencing. This is also a very important thing. Right? Referencing and where applicable, obtaining permission for the use of all published and unpublished work. Now, many of you who have published papers in journals and so on, you know now we cannot actually reproduce a figure from someone else's paper without obtaining formal approval. Right? So we have to actually accurately reference to both published and unpublished work, including theories, concepts, and so on. Authorship. This is also very important. When you add authors, you have to get their consent. And that is why now in journals, when you submit a paper, all the co-authors are contacted to check whether they are aware that they are a co-author of this publication. I had my own experience about 20 years ago, where somebody published a paper with my name and my student's name, and we were not aware. And this was a very prestigious journal, and the company that is responsible for the journal actually contacted me, including the editor. Then only I came to know about this paper. And upon further investigation, we came to know there was another paper under review with, again, my name and my student's name. So this is a very important thing. Acknowledgement. Acknowledging appropriately all those and only those who have contributed to research. Only those is also very important, because in sometimes we have, for various reasons, I will talk later about that, why people want to acknowledge others unnecessarily, and including funders and sponsors when they are actually funded by various agencies. Next is the conflict of interest management. This is also very important. Identifying and addressing any real, potential, or perceived conflict of interest. So conflict of interest can be real, something that is very clear and visible. On other cases, it can be a potential conflict of interest. It is not there today, but there is the potential. Maybe as the research progresses. Also, conflict of interest can be perceived. Others might see a conflict of interest. So these all have to be managed to ensure that the integrity of research is not compromised. Now, this topic is a very important one. So there is also what are called World Conferences on Research Integrity. There is an organization that is responsible for this, and number of conferences have been held. And there are statements coming from this group. And what is called the Singapore statement, I would like to highlight to you. There is a preamble where it identifies the value and benefits of research. Now, always in research, as we all know, there can be and are national and disciplinary differences in the way research is organized and conducted. That is definitely true, right? There is, of course, in disciplinary big differences. If someone doing pure mathematics research and someone doing stem cell research or medical research using human subjects, very different environment, very different set of background. And similarly, sometimes there can be national differences because certain things that are allowed in certain countries may not be allowed in other countries. So there can be rules and regulations that can be different from country to country. So that can have, some of it can be even to the extent that cultural and so. Right? However, the principles and professional responsibilities that are fundamental to the integrity of research is universal. Doesn't matter where you do that. Right? And what are those principles? Honesty in all aspects of research. So whether you live in country X or Y, that is important in both places. Accountability in the conduct of research. Professional courtesy and fairness in working with others. There are examples of that also, where you will find such courtesies and fairness didn't exist, has led into some very unpleasant situations. Good stewardship of research on behalf of others. So there has to be people who are looking after the research, taking the responsibility. And these are the research responsibilities defined in the Singapore statement. Integrity. We have talked about this earlier, and we are talking about that also. Researchers should take responsibility for trustworthiness of their research. They should adhere to regulations. Research methods. You have to make sure that appropriate methods are used. And conclusions are based on critical analysis and so on. As I said, research records should be clear and accurate records should be available. Research findings. Today we know that even when we publish a paper, the journals ask whether the research data is available. Right? You have to make a statement on that. Right? So those things are coming into the picture. Those things didn't exist when I published my research first paper about in the 1980s. Nobody asked me whether I have data or not. Right? But you know, things have happened. The world has become more complex. Now there are systems available actually to make sure that data is available, shareable, and accessible openly. Authorship, again, right? That we should take responsibility for the authorship. And all those contributed to the work should appear in the authorship according to a certain criteria. Now, different labs, different countries, different systems may have a different way of actually listing the names of the co-authors. Right? I know that in some groups it's alphabetical. In some groups, the principal investigator goes the last, and so on. But whatever it is, there should be a well-defined process, so there is no questions raised about these issues. And also in publication acknowledgement, they should acknowledge the names and roles of those who made significant contributions. funders and so on. And that is why today actually almost every journal, you have to define how you contributed, who did what. You can't just publish a paper without identifying the contributions of each and every co-author. So these things are now coming into the system because of issues related to research integrity. As I told you, in 2005 or 2006, I wasn't aware, but I came to know that I have 2 papers under review that I had no contribution. These are real examples. Peer review. Peer review is a very important thing in the research enterprise. Now, when you get a request to do peer review, you have to be very fair, objective, prompt, and rigorous in your evaluation. And respect confidentiality. You cannot take someone's paper and then take the ideas from there during the review process and publish that work. That has happened also. Similarly, when a granting agency sends an application for you to review, you can't take that application and then prepare your own funding application, stealing that idea. Conflict of interest, public communication, reporting irresponsible research practices. This is also very important, right? As a credible researcher, you have a responsibility to report when someone is doing something that is unacceptable, because that is important to the health of the entire research system. Then when that happens, or if somebody questions your research, then there is a requirement to responding to irresponsible research practices, right? So this is also another important thing. Research environment. Because research environment is again a very important thing. There have been cases of very abusive and poisonous research environments where research trainees have been subjected to very unacceptable working conditions, right? These are all coming under research integrity and ethics. And finally, societal considerations. What are the social benefits and risks inherent to your research? Now, let me also actually talk briefly about different types of research misconduct. These are some common cases. There can be a long list with specific instances or specific examples, but in general, fabrication. Fabrication is making up experimental data. There are many examples. If you look at internet, you will find cases of research misconduct investigations coming from simply from fabrication. Falsification. That is, you are manipulating experiments, results, equipment, processes to create favorable outcomes. So you are basically cooking your data by changing your experiments and so on, so you can get some favorable outcomes that will perhaps support your hypothesis. And in the process, you will actually delete some results or withhold some results because certain results will not support your hypothesis, right? And that is also a common misconduct. Plagiarism, including self-plagiarism. That is hiding your own work. You publish a paper and you have published similar papers in the past, but you don't refer to them. Right? That is bad as the standard plagiarism, where you are not referring to the relevant literature to your publication. or borrowing ideas, and so on. Authorship, we talked about this. There is also this practice in certain places of selling authorship for various professional benefits and so on. Adding outsiders as authors for favoritism. That's people in the position of power can be approached and be given an opportunity to be a co-author, expecting some favoritism in return. And similarly, you can go to the other extreme and deny authorship to people who actually deserve authorship because they have contributed, and so on. And there can be also issues with respect to how you order co-authors in a paper, right? Is it there is a system? Is it random, right? So those are also very important. Conflict of interest, financial or material, abuse of power, favoritism, harassment, approvals. This is also very important. When you do research, you have to make sure that you obtain proper approvals. And these included institutional approvals when required, funding agency approval or sponsor approvals, and failure to obtain ethics approval. Sometimes people do things that require ethics approval, right? Or health and safety and other approvals that are within the institution. So there can be research misconduct because that was not done. And as I said, an abusive research environment where one harasses trainees and personnel, violate health and safety standards, especially when you are dealing with chemicals and various other things that are dangerous. Then also the issue of unfair compensation has come up in various jurisdictions with respect to research and lack of transparency and so on. I also want to specifically talk a little bit about integrity of research training, because this is a very important thing when it comes to the good health of the research enterprise. Training is a critical element of the global research enterprise. However, less attention is paid to raising awareness of research integrity and ethics amongst the trainees due to various factors. Because often people consider trainees to be in the order of hierarchy. They are the decision makers and so on in many systems. So there is often the feeling that, like these things need not to be actually taught to them and so on. However, the future of research integrity and research ethics will depend very much on to what extent we teach our trainees about these matters, because they are the ones who will eventually take over the research enterprise and take it forward. So therefore, all research trainees, including students, interns, etc., must be educated on research integrity and related ethics. And there are examples actually, if you look around literature, where the trainees actually became the whistleblowers. When people were violating integrity of research, the trainees came forward. So there are examples like that. So it is very important that when we talk about integrity and ethics, we also pay attention to research trainees. They should be free of biases. They should be trained to think objectively and also to follow institutional policies and guidelines while doing research. Now let's talk a little bit about research ethics. So what are ethics? Ethics are a set of principles to ensure that research is conducted in a responsible and a safe manner with high integrity. If you look at the Economic and Social Research Council of UK, they have defined 6 principles of ethical research. First is, research should aim to maximize benefit for individuals and society and minimize risk and harm. The rights and dignity of individuals and groups should be respected. Wherever possible, participation should be voluntary and appropriately informed. Research should be conducted with integrity and transparency. Lines of responsibility and accountability should be clearly defined. Independence of research should be maintained, and where conflicts of interest cannot be avoided, they should be made explicit. I would go one more step and say that there are also conflict of interest management, because there are instances where the conflict of interest cannot avoid, and in those cases you can actually manage the conflict of interest. There are processes around universities around the world. You will find that people actually recognize this situation both in terms of employment as well as in research and various other areas where the conflict of interest cannot be eliminated due to various reasons. But the conflict of interest can be managed so that nothing undesirable can happen. So research ethics, there are a number of areas when we talk about research ethics where guidelines, frameworks are established. Human and animal subject ethics. In research, you will find situations where you will actually use human subject. And similarly, in drug discovery and various other research, animals are used. So there are separate procedures, human and animal subject ethics, and these are usually handled by institutional committee. Then increasingly I think even in the last couple of decades, we also have situation concerning environmental research ethics, right? Because people are doing research related to environment. And there again, we have to make sure that appropriate ethics are followed in conducting the research. So increasingly you will find in institutions, there are committees looking into this aspect also. Then there are situations with respect to health and safety, right? Where one has to actually follow guidelines and frameworks, and there are institutional committees for that. Then research training ethics. That is in terms of how you are expected to train your students. What are your expectations? And so on. These are usually not done through committees, right? These are set of standards that are established either by the institution or funding agency guidelines that will actually give you a framework in terms of research training. And similar to that, you have also publications. When you are publishing, what are the things you should do? What are the things you should not do? Right? Again, we don't have committees and so on. Unless somebody complain, then there can be a university-wide committee that look into the investigation of research integrity issues or research misconduct. But publication ethics are standard principles that are established to help researchers to actually decide the best practices in terms of publishing. Then also use of grant funding. This is another area where there have been a lot of research misconduct or research integrity violations in the use of grant funding. So there again, usually there is no committee that is monitoring this, but institutional and funding agency guidelines will tell you how to use the funds in the most appropriate way. And if there are deviations or misconduct, then there will be separate inquiries into those processes. And then as an outcome of those, the institutional as well as funding agency guidelines can change. And that has happened in many countries around the world, right? Where such investigations have led to improvement of the existing guidelines of funding agencies as well as the institutions. Now, generally, when it comes to research ethics, there is an approval process, which is usually done through the Research Ethics Committee, which is an institutional committee, and that manage the ethics approval process and independently fulfill institutional obligations to government, funders, and society, right? Often actually separate committees dealing with different areas. For example, I know in many universities, there is one committee for human ethics approval, separate committee for animal ethics, and then a separate committee for environmental research, and so on. However, the ethics approval process must be well defined and efficient, so there are no long delays. And we should also recognize that not all research will require ethics approval. In fact, in a university, you would find that a large percentage of research do not require ethics approval through various relevant committees, because there is no element of ethics involved in those research other than to make sure that you conduct your research with high integrity. All records of ethic reviews and reporting must be kept. Privacy and confidentiality must be protected. And another important thing is sufficient training must be given to research ethics committee members so that the committee can discharge their duties in a very capable manner. I want to show you this. This is kind of the foundation for the human experimentation, defining the ethical principles for human experimentation. This is actually an outcome of the trials of World War II. So it's very old principles, what is known as the Nuremberg Code. And this is used by funding agencies, universities throughout the world to set up the basic foundation for human ethics approval. And there are 10 principles here, right? I'm not going to read those things, but it is actually available. You can see that from the internet. And I was trying to find what is the process in Sri Lanka. And I came across this publication that was done in 2018 from the internet, which is the Code of Conduct on Health Research in Sri Lanka, dated 2018. It is a document prepared by the Ministry of Health. And there was a link to it, but when I clicked on that, actually it doesn't go to this specific page. It goes to the Ministry of Health. But on the other hand, what it tells is that there is something, and because there are a lot of medical schools in Sri Lanka, so they must be guided by some principles and frameworks. So I just want to mention this to you, that in case any of you are interested, such a document actually exists, and it's possible that it has gone through revisions and changes over the time, because it is what I found from the internet was dated 2018. In fact, it was related to an editorial published in the Journal of the National Science Foundation. With respect to animal ethics, I could not find anything. So I'm using the Canadian Council guidelines, ethics on animal investigation. So this is also very comprehensive. You can see the fundamental principles here, and what is called the 3R tenet, which is replacement, reduction, and refinement. These are the fundamentals guiding the use of animals in research investigations. and there are certain guidelines and recommendations in terms of what you can do and what you should try to avoid, and so on. So this is another document that is, I think, relevant. If there are no such similar documents actually developed for the local context, but even if it is developed, I think these are coming from universal agreements. Most of these things are actually done through international collaborations and so on. So I thought sharing this with you in case any one of you are interested in this. Now, looking ahead, in terms of these issues, both in terms of integrity and research ethics, the implication of artificial intelligence on all aspects of research integrity and ethics. How is that going to change? To be honest, I think there is going to be significant impact, because some of the things I discussed with you, they will, to some extent, will be impacted by AI. So there will be some significant impact of that. And then also I want to mention to you about the business of open access in terms of publications and predatory journals. This has been a topic for the last, I think, 2 decades, and we see a growing trend in terms of open access, where there is a mandatory fee to publish your publication or paper, and often what I have seen is actually some relaxation in terms of the peer review process and so on, particularly in the case of predatory journals, where various kinds of practices are used, and with fake H indices and various other things to misguide potential authors. So these are issues that we are facing. And another thing is also that whether we like it or not, I think rankings have had an impact in terms of research integrity as well as ethics. Certain things that people do are the competitions and so on, right? They are coming from the prominence of ranking in our environments, particularly over the last 2 decades. Another thing people have identified are what are called citation and authorship farms, right? These are situations where groups are formed, where co-authorship is shared, whether one is actually contributing or not. And then you also actually create citation cycles within those large groups. So these are called citation and authorship farms, and they have been actually considered in certain rankings of researchers to eliminate those things. I think eliminate is very difficult, but at least try to minimize the effect of these practices of citation and authorship farms, and also what are called salami papers. These are papers that you do a piece of research and then you slice it into 10 articles. So each one will contain bits and pieces. And then if you just look at counting number of papers, then of course what you have is a set of salami papers. And they will bring actually very little credibility to you. Not many people will refer to your work. So these are issues, challenges that we are looking at. Now I think I'm hitting almost my time. So let me conclude with few things, and I hope you got something out of listening to me. So integrity and ethics are essential to promote, plan, conduct, and disseminate credible research. While the issues and elements related to research integrity ethics have some disciplinary dependence, the fundamental principles are universal and applicable to all disciplines. institutions, funding agencies, and governments have paid increasing attention to this. I think if you look at 50, 60 years ago, I think generally people or agencies, universities did not face the kind of issues that I think they have faced in the recent decades. So as a result, there is significant progress in terms of developing frameworks, guidelines, and support services. Many universities around the world will conduct seminar series, develop guidelines, bring experts actually to educate people about various aspects related to integrity and ethical standards. Everyone must study and understand the policies related to research integrity and ethics available at your institution. If you don't have, just go to the web internet and look at some well-established research institutions, universities. You will find tons of information there with respect to frameworks, guidelines, even like tutorials, webinars, and so on, which you can actually follow free of charge, educate yourself, and learn the basic principles and practices. If you have a problem in dealing with some issue related to integrity, ethics, please try to seek help. Because seeking help is much better than trying to manage a big crisis at a later stage. So that is my advice. And finally, you can read anything about ethics, understand the guidelines, frameworks, and all that. But at the end of the day, it is your conscience that will decide whether you want to uphold the integrity of your work or not. So that is my most important message I want to tell you, because integrity is a personal thing. Whereas in terms of setting up ethical frameworks, ethics approval, and everything, the universities can do a lot. Funding agencies will do, right? But integrity is a personal conviction. And that is very important when it comes to doing credible research and making sure what you do has very high integrity. So thank you very much. And I hope I have given something useful to you. And if you have a few questions, I would be happy to answer.